It reminds me of the preacher that was trying to be rather picturesque, and he said one morning, he said, you know, a sermon is like a blade of grass. He said it starts off so ever small, and he says it grows and grows and grows. So that's the way a sermon is. Next week, he was out cutting his lawn, and one of the mischievous deacons happened to drive by, and he stopped for just a moment and said, cut it short, cut it short. And so I think that's what Maxie has been telling us. Thank you, Maxie, for those very kind words. And I certainly would like to spend considerable time reciprocating and telling you why I love Brother Boren and how he and Fran have been such a great team in the kingdom of God and how much, much good they have accomplished in the church we all love. And I always count it a distinct honor to be a co-worker with Maxie in efforts such as we are a part of this evening. I have many happy memories that flood my soul while I stand in your presence this evening. It was my privilege for quite some time to stand here each Lord's Day and to preach the gospel of Christ as the local evangelist for the Brown Trail Church, and then to be in the facilities elsewhere and being a part of the School of Preaching. And I certainly want to wish God's blessings upon every activity that is a part of the overall work of the Brown Trail congregation. So glad to see all of you here. Friends we haven't seen for some years, gospel preachers whom we love and haven't seen for some time, and it's just been an encouragement to be here and to see you. Hearing that Hezekiah had been sick, the king of Babylon sent letters and a present unto him. And Hezekiah showed his visitors from Babylon his treasures. Well, about that time, Isaiah the prophet appeared upon the scene of action, and he inquired of Hezekiah concerning these visitors. And Hezekiah responds by saying, they come from a far country. They come from Babylon. And then Isaiah asks that penetrating question, what have they seen in thine house? 2 Kings 20, verses 12 through 21. And it is that question, what have they seen in thine house, that will serve as the basis of our study together at this hour. I would like to begin first of all this evening by observing, what have they seen in thine house? Have they seen the presence of the Lord? I remember years ago in holding gospel meetings, many of them in the rural areas, that you would see plaques on the wall, and those plaques would read as follows: Christ is the unseen guest at every meal. Christ is a silent listener to every conversation. And what a beautiful sentiment that really is. After all, are we not to crucify self and let Christ live within us? Galatians 2 and verse 20. Are we not to follow the example of Christ? 1 Peter chapter 2, 21 and 22. Are we not to be transformed into the image of Christ? 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18. Are we not to have the mind of Christ? Philippians chapter 2 and verse 5. You see, the presence of Christ cannot be hid, whether it be in the heart or in the home. In the book of Mark chapter 2, beginning with 1, we read that Jesus entered the city of Capernaum. And he entered a certain house, and then the text says, and it was noised abroad that he was in the house. I repeat, whether in the home or in the heart, the presence of Christ cannot be hid. The persistent knock at the door brought the mother to the door. And when she got there, she saw a neatly dressed man holding a Bible under his arm. He only asked a question. That question was, does Jesus live here? And he turned and slowly walked away. All through the day, that question came to her mind. Does Jesus live here? When her husband came in that afternoon from work, she told him her experience. He said, well, did you not tell him that we're church members? Did you not tell him we attend regularly? Did you not tell him that we give to the work of the church? Did you not tell him we are a respected family in the community? And she said, he did not ask me, are you members of the church? He did not ask me, do you attend regularly? He did not ask me, do you give of your money? He did not ask me, are you a respected family in this community? But he asked me, does Jesus live here? And I've been wondering all day, does Jesus live here? What a difference the presence of Christ makes in the language we use, in the behavior we manifest, in the television shows we view, the books we read, and the use we make of the internet. His presence makes a difference. I begin tonight with the basic. What have they seen in thine house? Have they seen the presence of Christ? Secondly, what have they seen in thine house? Have they seen a haven of happiness? Years ago, in the 20th century Christian, years ago, Brother Willard Collins wrote a very beautiful article. And I quote briefly from that piece. The companionship of Mr. and Mrs. J.E. Acuff, 4301 Utah Avenue, Nashville, Tennessee, is a source of inspiration to me. Married September 3, 1903, each at the age of 23. Mrs. Acuff states, I cannot remember the time when I have been unhappy since my wedding day. Although for a few years I had to use a clothing box for a dining table, I was happy with what I had. I ask you, friends, is your home a haven of happiness? A happy home is the bud of which heaven is the blossom. A glance of heaven to see, till none on earth is given. And yet a happy home is but an early heaven. Henry Ward Beecher once penned, a man's house should be on the hilltop of cheerfulness and serenity, so high that no shadows rest upon it, and where the morning comes so early, and the evening tarries so late, that the day has twice as many golden hours as those of other men. He is to be pitied whose house is in some valley of grief between the hills, with the longest night and the shortest day. Home should be the center of joy, equatorial and tropical. What a wonderful paragraph. However, some homes are simply cauldrons of confusion and of strife and of turmoil and of quarreling. They're simply cauldrons of ill will and suspicion and jealousy and fault-finding. But you see, God desires otherwise. God desires that our homes be places of peace and tranquility and love and understanding and fulfillment. Listen to the sacred text. Live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest. Ecclesiastes 9:9. Rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Proverbs chapter 5:18. And then Jeremiah in chapter 16:9 speaks of, and I now quote, speaks of the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness Now watch this. And the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride. Here where he talks about the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, he speaks of the voice of the husband and the wife. Do you recall in Deuteronomy 24:5 that when an Israelite married, that he was to stay at home for 1 year, and the Bible says to cheer up his wife? Our homes are to be havens of happiness. But then again tonight, thirdly, may I ask, what have they seen in thine house? Have they seen an unwavering commitment to successful child rearing? In the book of Proverbs 22:6 we read, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart therefrom. The New Testament corollary is Ephesians 6:4. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and in the admonition of the Lord. Now, under the canopy of that matter of training up our children in the way they should go, I just want to mention several observations, some 4 or 5, and discuss them briefly. First, the weight of this training and bringing up our children falls on the shoulders of the home. Some years ago, I was in a series of meetings in Silverton, Texas, out on the Cap Rock. We had services at 6 o'clock, I believe it was, maybe 6:30, in the morning, and then again, of course, that night. Well, outside of Silverton, as some of you certainly know, having been there, there's one of the largest congregations among us that do not have Bible classes, do not have Bible schools. And the preacher came to our meeting. He was there at all of the day services, and the local preacher called on him to lead in prayer. He prayed for our meeting. He prayed for me individually. We went over and had fellowship in the facilities next door. He went right over and had fellowship with us. I thought that to be very different. And so when I got home that day, in the preacher's home in which I was staying that week, I asked, oh, he said, that happens all the time. He said, I go to their meetings, and they do the same thing to me. And then he said, we had a meeting with those brethren, and they said, we respect the autonomy of the local church. And if you brethren in town want to have Bible classes, that's your decision. But we have decided here not to have Bible classes. And respecting the autonomy of the local churches, we believe that we ought to respect one another. And then they added, and the reason why we do not have Bible classes is because we believe that the major responsibility in rearing our children falls on the home. That's a marvelous observation. And yet sometimes I wonder, whatever our children know about the Bible, where did they learn that? Did they learn it in our Bible classes? If so, that's truly a remarkable plus. But why couldn't so many basics have been learned in the home setting, and then for the Bible classes simply to supplement, not supplant, but supplement the instruction that they had thus received? Those who have sought to figure it out tell us that between the age of birth and 21, the average child spends about 105,000 hours a week. Now, these waking hours, about 2,100, are spent in Bible school and worship, about 10,000 in public schools, and 92,000 hours are spent in the home setting. That's why I say the weight of the responsibility of child rearing is in the home. Secondly, this training cannot begin too early. Botanists tell us that they can tell every injury that has come to a plant. And the earlier that the injury came, the more non-erasable is the trace. Surely that's also true in child rearing. Someone said, let every father and mother realize that when their child is 3 years old, some have even said 18 months old, they have done more than half of all they will ever do in forming their character. That's rather mind-boggling. But now, another observation. What is involved in this training? My friends, there are 3 elements in child rearing. It's very simple. And here are the 3 elements. Number 1, instruction. The Israelites were to diligently teach God's commandments to their children when they were sitting, whenever they were walking, whenever they were reclining, and whenever they arose. That's instruction. Deuteronomy chapter 6, 6 through 7. Now, this instruction we give our children can be verbal or it can be nonverbal. I was at a meeting in Pulaski, Tennessee years ago. Last night of the meeting, I was in a wonderful home to enjoy a meal. Several were there. And one of the brethren said, as a little black-eyed boy ran through the living room, they said, you ought to hear him preach. I said, oh. They said his daddy is a contractor. And they said he has built him a pulpit to the exact proportion, pulpit stand, of the one in the meeting house. Said you ought to hear him get behind it. And you ought to hear him preach. I want to ask you a question. When that father gave that pulpit to his little boy, what instruction did he give him? When I was 13 years old, my father went to the Freed Hardeman lectures in Henderson, Tennessee. Back in the days when it was 2 to 3 weeks in length. I remember him coming home and talking about listening to H. Leo Bowles' lecture on the Holy Spirit. That book of lectures now in book form. I remember hearing him talk about the lectures given by C.E. McGoy on the parables and so on. But I suppose the thing that's the most indelibly stamped on my mind is when my daddy came home, he gave me a little book, a little red book, about 1/4 of an inch thick, and it's called Sermons, R.C. White. And my daddy never gave me that book and said, son, if you don't preach, I'll whip you. No. But when my daddy gave me that book, he gave me some instruction, just the giving it to me. Instruction takes 2 forms, verbal and non-verbal. Secondly, another one of the ingredients of child rearing is example. Instruction, then example. You see, the child can be taught the precept. But if the example is not set before him, the chances are very great that he will follow the example rather than the precept. Example. You have heard many times this beautiful story. The preachers comparing translations. One said, I love the King James because of its beautiful language. Another one said, I love the American Standard because of its closeness to the original. Another said, I love Moffat because it's so up to date in its use of the language. The fourth preacher said, I love my mother's translation. And they said, your mother's? Did your mother translate the scriptures? And he said, oh, yes. She gave me the most convincing translation of all. She translated the scriptures into life. Please follow me. There are 3 elements in child rearing. They are instruction. Secondly, we have example. I've often thought about what an example that Zacharias and Elizabeth set before John the Baptist. I have a sermon that I sometimes preach on Jesus' favorite preacher. You know who Jesus' favorite preacher was? Was John the Baptist. He said, there's not a greater arisen among women than John the Baptist. And no doubt, measurable influence was given to his life and preaching from the influence of his parents. I thought about the example set by Joseph and Mary before our Lord in Luke chapter 2, 39 through 52. But then thirdly, there is the element of discipline. Discipline is the administration of some form of punishment or training when an infraction has been committed by the child. I like to tell this story when he's in the audience. My brother Paul, the only brother I have, is in the audience, so I'll tell the story. My mother and daddy moved to a little small 1,000 square feet home in our hometown of Port Arthur, Texas. Brand new home, and we were so proud of it. And Daddy made a little adjustment here and there. And one of the adjustments that he made was he went out on the back of the lot and he planted 2 plum trees. And I often wondered why he only planted 2. But later on, I understood why he planted 2. One was for me, and one was for Paul. And Paul stayed stripped all the time. Mine flourished. But nonetheless, there we have discipline. And in the book of Proverbs 13 and 24 we read, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. One of the greatest elders this area ever had was the late Richard Boyd of the old Glen Garden Church. What a great man, great man. He was an educator. And he and I were talking in a social setting, and some of these matters came up. And he said, Brother Winkler, I've always tried to follow 3 F's in disciplining students. And here they are. I try to be fair. I try to be firm. And I try to be friendly. You can't beat that. Even in the disciplining of children. But why is it, my friends, that sometimes so many of us fail in this marvelous work of training our children successfully? I'm going to mention 2 things that cause people to fail. Number 1, we are too busy heaping up this life's goods. We have men today that are more concerned with their flocks than they are with their families, more concerned with their crops than they are their children, more concerned about their money than they are their marriages, more concerned about their businesses than they are their boys. Secondly, we sometimes fail because we're too concerned with our recreational pursuits. Some are more concerned with their golf swing than they are with their offspring. What's the bottom line? We've got to delegate time, and much of it, to successful child rearing. There is no such thing as being a faithful Christian and an unfaithful parent. And let us not forget, how can parents expect to go to heaven when through their negligence their children have gone to hell? In the next place, what have they seen in thine house? Have they seen an allegiance to the family altar? A dog is born with the instinct to bury bones. But you put him on a concrete floor and let him stay there over a period of time, and he loses all the instinct to bury bones. It seems that a child comes into the world with an instinct to give reverence, to give respect. And if that is not somehow or another nourished in time, it also will be lost. There is an old adage that we've often used that says, the family that prays together stays together. Never should a day pass when a family does not stop to read the Bible and pray together. The devil has to work awful hard for all that he gets at the knee of a praying mother. Family devotions constitute a very strong preventive is a better word, for apostasy. Batsell Barrett Baxter had a young person to write a paragraph and give it to him. It reads, "The most wonderful devotional periods that I have ever experienced were on the nights in which my family gathered in the living room and worshiped God together. My father would read from God's Word, and we would then discuss the meaning of what he had read. I learned much of God's Word in this manner and am greatly benefited from this knowledge today. After we had studied for half an hour, one of us would pray. It was usually started by the youngest, and each of us would pray until my mother and then my father closed the prayer. These experiences," wrote the young man, "were so meaningful to me that time will never erase them. My father has passed on now, but his and mother's guidance through these devotions will always keep me nearer my God and my Savior." That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. That the family altar is a preventive to apostasy. When Paul was in the service during World War II, my father was a gospel preacher, and then later on he went into it full time for many years. But at that time he worked at what was then called the Texas Company, Texaco, as it is now known. And my father oftentimes would work the graveyard shift. He would go to work at 11 at night and get off the next morning at about 7 o'clock. I was courting my wife, Betty. And her father had a curfew that was like the law of the Medes and the Persians. It could never be altered. And that curfew was 10 p.m. 10 p.m. I raised my own sons with curfews. Their curfew was 10:30. And if I had them to rear over, it would still be 10:30. Not much meanness happens before 10:30. But nonetheless, I would come home from having been with my wife during those courting days, and I have a very, very sweet memory. My dad had gone to work, and my mother was dressed in her night clothing. And the moment that I walked through the door, she would say to me, "Son, now get the Bible and read us a chapter, and then you get on your knees and lead us in a prayer." You think I could betray that? Do you really think I could betray that? What kind of heart would I have? I'm asking tonight, have they seen in your home and an allegiance to the family altar? Add to that. What have they seen in thine house? Have they seen evidences of an unqualified love? Husbands ought to love their wives, reads Ephesians chapter 5, 22 through 33. In fact, that's stated 4 times in that paragraph. And then wives are exhorted to love their husbands, also in the book of Titus 2, 1 through 5. And then parents are exhorted to love their children, in Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. And it's the agape variety of love that is being discussed in those verses. And what kind of love is that? That's a love that is selfless, a love that always desires the very best for the one loved. It's the very kind of love that Paul delineated in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. So I ask, what had they seen in thine house? Had they seen evidences of an unqualified love? And then add to that in the next place, have they seen in thine house an unalterable commitment to family cohesion? Families ought to pray together. They ought to eat together. They ought to work together. And they ought to pray together. The disintegration of the American family, with each family member riding off in separate directions, needs correction. You see, the Bible says that brethren are to dwell together in unity. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Psalms 133 and 1. Now, whenever the Bible teaches us that, there is more involved in congregational unity than simply the absence of strife. Same thing about our families. We may talk about how that in our families there ought to be cohesion. There's more involved in that than simply the absence of strife. There ought to also be a mutuality of love and of commitment and of dedication and of interest. In the Old Testament of the book of Judges, you're going to read the life of Samson. Samson's father was named Manoah. His mother is mentioned frequently, but she's never named. And I was reading that somewhat very slowly and in depth for preparation of a sermon one day, and I observed something I'd never seen. When you read chapters 13 and 14 of the book of Judges, every time that you read of Manoah, it'll say, and his wife. And his wife. What's my point? You never read of one unless you read of the other. That's cohesion. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7 says that husbands and wives are heirs together of the grace of life. Now, for this family cohesion to exist, as I've formerly alluded to the same, there has to be a proper allotment of time. Some years ago, in a secular publication, I picked up these statistics. The average American father dedicates only 7.5 minutes per week to his children. Watch it. That is, when he turns off the television, puts down the newspaper, and completely drops all other interests and totally gives himself to the children. 7.5 minutes. My friends, we cannot rear children on 7.5 minutes. It takes time. Now, the church of our Lord, meaning so well, can contribute to the disintegration of the family. We have Sunday night worship. We have Monday night visitation. We have Tuesday night youth activities. We have Wednesday night prayer meeting. We have Thursday night elders meetings. We try to visit a sister church on Friday night, and then we reserve Saturday night for family night. I don't believe in that. I've heard ministers of the gospel, they meant so well, they were honest, that said to me, Brother Winkler, I always try to reserve Saturday night for my family. I don't understand that. The idea of reserving only one night a week for your family. I repeat again, it'd be difficult to rear a family with that type of an arrangement. Out in California, I know what they're doing. Many of the churches, particularly in the Bay Area, they don't have Sunday night services anymore. Someone says, they're all going in the way of apostasy? No, sir. As soon as Sunday morning services are out, they all go and have a meal at a given location, and they have their evening services at 1 o'clock, and the rest of the day is given to the family. I think that's rather meritorious myself. I think that's worth taking a look at. There's one of the larger churches in Middle Tennessee, whose location I will not give, started that. And they have grown as a result of it. Brethren, all change is not bad. Change of doctrine is wrong, but change of methodology needs to be looked at. And in some of these areas, we might need to do a little adjusting and not disintegrate the family unit by having so many good things. And then, what have they seen in that house? Have they seen a genuine commitment to the ethic of purity? I was asked to come to Oklahoma City and to hold a series of meetings and to deal with nothing but the ethic of purity. When one of the elders called me and said, we're having trouble with effeminate hairstyles, drinking, smoking, immodest, said, come here and hold us a meeting and help us. Why do congregations sometimes seethe with these problems? Simply because high moral standards of conduct that prohibit such matters were not established and rigidly maintained in the home. And then after that, there's the gradual erosion of our concept and practice of purity as a result of the media, television, movies, song lyrics, magazines, and the internet. And let us not forget that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 4:23, 23:7. And what we see, what we read, and what we hear stimulates our thought. So if you want to control life, you control thought. And if you want to control thought, you control the stimuli. And that's why then we need to give attention to these matters. And then I ask, what have they seen in that house? Have they seen a gradual erosion of the marriage bond? The evidence is overwhelming that marriage is no longer held in high esteem. Instead, marriage is considered a mistake of a lifetime. It's considered as something to be talked out of. It's considered as something very cumbersome. It is spoken of and conceived of as a relic of an antiquated past. And it is the brunt of so many, oftentimes ill-conceived jokes. You see, to prove that marriage is no longer held in high esteem, observe how lightly it is regarded, how miserably it is often tolerated, and how quickly it is dissolved in the lives of millions. But God's Bible still says marriage is for life. Romans 7, 1 through 4. There being only one exception to that, and that's fornication. Matthew chapter 19, 9 and Matthew chapter 5 and verse 39. Watch it carefully. The monogamy of marriage must be taught in the home, in the classroom, and in the pulpit. To do otherwise will result in many marriages ending in divorce. And the church of our Lord being inundated with unscriptural marriages, and that results in the church being weakened and the nation being imperiled. And then last of all tonight, what have they seen in thine house? Have they seen a mutual effort on the part of each to assist the other in going to heaven? Husbands and wives are to love each other as Christ loved the church. And he laid down his life to save the church, Ephesians 5 and verse 25. 1 Corinthians 7 and 16 says, or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? Did not Noah save his wife, Genesis 7 and 8? No doubt Zacharias contributed to the welfare of Elizabeth and vice versa. Same thing happened with Aquila and Priscilla. And the same thing, no doubt, happened with Apphia and Philemon. But on the contrary, what about Lot? Lot was a contributing factor to his wife being lost. Being lost. Olivia Langdon was a believer. She married Mark Twain, who was an unbeliever, at least an agnostic. She thought that her sweet spirit and devout faith would soon win Twain. During their first few months of marriage, they read the Bible every day together, and they had prayer at every meal. But that was stopped after a while by Twain because he said it's too formal. And they also ceased to go to worship at the little chapel nearby. Olivia gave up then some of her long-held convictions. She had her faith in the providence and promises of God shaken through her husband's philosophy. And then when she came to face the dark valley of the shadow of death, and knowing that her life was very short, Twain said to her, Livy, she was called Olivia, he said, Livy, if it comforts you to lean on the Christian faith, do so. And she answered, I can't, youth, Y-O-U-T-H, that was her pet name for him. She said, I can't, youth. I haven't any. And the thought that he had destroyed his wife's faith, though he considered such an illusion, was a terrible trial to Mark Twain in his latter years. Listen carefully. Each in the marital relationship should contribute to the salvation of the other. Each should try and picture the penetrating and damning pain that will be experienced if at the judgment they will have been responsible for the other being lost, of the other being lost. On the contrary, let us help each other to go to heaven. Our conclusion. What have they seen in thine house? That's a question with eternal consequences. Have they seen the presence of Christ? Have they seen a haven of happiness? Have they seen an unwavering commitment to child rearing? Have they seen an allegiance to the family altar? Have they seen evidences of an unqualified love? Have they seen an unalterable commitment to family cohesion? Have they seen a commitment to the ethic of purity? Have they seen a gradual erosion of the marriage bond? And have they seen a mutual effort on the part of each to assist the other in going to heaven? May we so order our homes that one day we'll all enter the home of the soul, where no wrinkle will ever furrow the brow, where gray hair will never appear like silver threads among the gold, where burdens will never bow the back, where tears will never bedew the cheek or dim the eye, and where sorrow never breaks the heart. Heaven is a city without griefs or graves, sins or sorrows, marriages or mournings, where the redeemed of all ages come with songs upon their lips to appear in the presence of the God that made them and the Christ that died in their interest. And there they sing, with all imperfections of the human voice having been removed, and joining in with the angelic chorus, they sing. Can you hear it? They sing the song of Moses and the Lamb. And may it be the happy lot of us all that will be ours to experience. And if you have a need tonight to make things right in your life, so that will be the case, by restoration to duty through repentance and prayer, or by becoming a Christian through becoming a baptized, confessing, penitent believer, we hope you will take advantage of this very scene. We're going to sing the first stanza only of the song that has been announced. And if you have a need that can be supplied by your response, Friends, we really do long to help you even now. As together, we now stand and we sing.